Thank you very much, IH21, for sponsoring this very inspiring and wonderful event in this wonderful place. And when I got invited, I have to confess I had some trepidations. Why? Because I did recall that here in this Prague castle, people engaging in heresy would be regularly thrown out of the window. And I come to you with some heretical news, but good news for the freedom of expression, good news for an open society. And the reason is the emergence of AI. Now, yes, you heard right, because I know that you have heard all the narrative, the agreed upon narrative, the narrow narrative, which is that AI is a threat to all of us. But I do believe, and I will make an argument, that AI will be or can be a tool for freedom, not for repression, a tool for autonomy and not for control. Let me elaborate. So unless you have been hibernating in a cave, you must have been inundated by stories about artificial intelligence that basically can be summarized here. The AI is useful to big companies, but woe to us citizens. Negative scenarios, class divide, ignorance, loss of individuality, loss of jobs, inequality, bias, lack of empathy, lack of transparency, lack of creativity, plagiarism, loss of privacy, business manipulation, security risks, surveillance capitalism in a surveillance state run by profit-maximizing high-tech corporation, usually American, etc. I could stop right here. This is where the conventional narrative ends, and AI as the problem, not as the solution. And that is reflected by, here are some of these things, that is reflected by a recent gathering, recent as in 2 days ago, in fact, with the time zone difference, less than 2 days ago in Washington, in the Senate building, where there was a conclave summoned by Chuck Schumer, majority leader, and a good friend of Nadine's and mine from college, and everybody in Silicon Valley was there. Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and anybody whose name you know would be there. And all these guys, yes, guys, were basically kissing the ring of Washington, saying, yes, we are mindful, yes, we will do something about it, just don't do it to us, we'll do it ourselves. Congregated there, somebody calculated were $550 billion of personal net worth. And that does not include the corporations that they control, which go into the many trillions of dollars. Now, let me be clear. Many of these problems with AI are real, even if they're overblown. We should not be pawns of technology. Being overcautious about losing control is part of our evolutionary survival mechanism. Always careful. Animals, dragons, machines displacing humans, including right here in Prague, the golem, man-created, threatening humans. But there are many, many. It's a genre. It's been there and will be there. But my forecast is much more positive, with some safeguards. AI is potentially good things for us, for us as users, consumers, citizens. Not just because of the efficiency gains, those are obvious, and not just because the immediacy of AI presence is vastly exaggerated. There's so much hype here. People stop losing limitations, but they're starting to see that the business case, the actual business applications, are much more limited than seemed to be described even a few weeks ago. And some of these predictions have been a joke. Even the distinguished AI computer scientist Geoffrey Hinton, known as the godfather of AI, wrote 7 years ago, quote, people should stop training radiologists now. They should stop training. It's just completely obvious, he writes, within 5 years, that's 2 years ago, deep learning is going to do better than a radiologist. So it's now 7 years later, radiologists are alive and well and charging people a lot of money. Rather, we must stop thinking of AI, whatever it is, as only an instrument of large organizations threatening personal autonomy, and start thinking of it as a potentially empowering technology. And I would use the word empowering, except that it has now also been deplatformed as a term that is condescending, et cetera, et cetera. So now, I'm not a Pollyanna here at all. In fact, in 1998, so that's 25 years ago, I wrote Why the Internet is Bad for Democracy, an article in Science magazine. And everybody then jumped on me. How could he say this? Because of course everyone at the time was starry-eyed, and everybody just knew that the internet would solve everything. We could communicate, and there would be peace and happiness and prosperity, and see what happened. But today I'm optimistic on this because there will be positive impacts on speech and privacy. Because AI lends itself also to something that I would describe as personal AI, a hugely powerful tool. What personal AI does is to change the imbalance of power between individuals and large organizations. And does so. It changes the rationale for some form of control, some form of regulation that were justified with good reason in the past by that imbalance of power between the individuals and larger institutions and large business institutions. And so let me be a bit kind of model this now. But let's think of on the left there a platform. Think of Google. Think of Facebook, think of Tencent, of Meta. It's got on it stores and social gathering spots and specialty services and content providers and games, videos, etc. And there's the user. Now you introduce AI into this, and AI now becomes a filter. And the filter can be used by the company, the platform, in a variety of ways. It can filter, it can select, it can ban, it can block, it can put on recommendations list, it can price differentiate, it can operate the financial flows inside the platforms. In fact, it creates almost its own monetary system. It adjudicates dispute on its platforms and can admit some and expel others. It can deplatform, control antisocial behavior, and as people misbehave, as they always do, use foul language, say hateful things, lie, cheat, and harass other people. In other words, be human. The platform is a government, in fact, in its own virtual world, a judiciary, a rule maker, a central bank, a chief censor. So, and this is what people are worried about. So there are several approaches to deal with that in the traditional scenario. And one of them is to have alternative platforms, so we have choices. If one platform one, is kind of like too restrictive for us, so we go to platform 2 or 3 or 4. In theory, that's kind of the classic economic solution to things. In practice, it's complicated. One, it might be difficult to create platform 2 and 3 in a sustainable economically and technical way. It's just kind of so much economies of scale for platform 1, and so we do see media concentration in all these instances. Secondly, it's difficult on the user to toggle from one platform to the next platform to the next one. Just in practical terms, it's very difficult. So a second solution then is to have the government as a regulator basically mandate platform 1 how to structure its AI. And those are the approaches that we now see. And in Brussels, a law has been passed that will come into effect very soon that in effect makes responsible the platform provider makes it responsible, makes it responsible also for the implications, what people do, such as these public providers, the stores and the content providers. Now the platform becomes responsible for it. So that's a kind of a tremendous liability that will work itself out. And it's a liability not on the content providers as such, but on the platforms, which happen to be American, so that's kind of more popularly acceptable. Now, so these are the two options. Now, but there's a third possibility, much more, which is that personal AI that I described about, that is less conventional. Suppose we think of a software module that is located under the control not of the platform, but of the individual, that is controlled and structured by the individual, and that would do for the individual, under their control, filtering of content, of ads, recommendations chosen from trusted sources, preferred content, products, search for them, locate the best price, find news, assert its veracity, shield children, block malicious actors. It becomes the personal assistant, the concierge, the receptionist, the companion, the data bank, the trusted gatekeeper, and more. It becomes developed, and I'm now talking to the future, our doctor, our stockbroker, our romantic matchmaker, our babysitter, our political advisor, our news filter, fact checker, personal trainer, teacher, negotiator, sex partner, shopper, partner in crime, if that's what we do, and gatekeeper. And all these raises, of course, new questions, but it is also means that these are things under the control of the individual, not of the company anymore. Now you will say, of course, and choices, etc. So a perimeter of control around the user. Now you will say, of course, this is way too complicated. How can you handle that? And you would be right. People like to have control, but they don't want to get their hands dirty, or they cannot do so, exercising that control. And for that reason, I believe that there will be emerging an entire new sector, new service sector, new industry of personal AI providers, companies that do not work for the platforms, but work for you, managing your AI under your instructions, your parameters, their recommendations to it, etc. And those personal AI providers could be different organizations. They could be consumer organizations, that would be kind of commercial, profit-maximizing institutions. There could be high-tech companies. There could be labor unions. There could be political parties, whatever it is. There would be choices for these personal AI providers. And those personal AI providers would, well, okay, there would be competition among them. The personal AI providers could also engage in collective action. That is, they could bundle not only you, but also lots of your friends and other people who think and share certain characteristics and certain interests, and you would become a kind of like a consumer organization empowered as a counterforce to the large tech companies. And so, so here, this is how I see the kind of the future. I mean, I could make this more complicated and more detailed, but basically, these are some ways in which we could have a counterforce to the AI controlled by companies. Now, are there problems with the system? Yes, there are some problems, and one of them is, and I will just kind of go through this really, really quickly, the personal AI providers themselves could develop some market power themselves and start to be not so much fiduciaries of yours, but start to control you, start to use the information that they have in a non-fiduciary way. That would be a problem. Similarly, it could lead in society to silos, the ones that we kind of dread, where people of some persuasion, some political views, some demographic characteristics like to congregate and get the same news, and they get the same information, different from others, those famous bubbles and silos. And there could be restrictions by the platforms of non-acceptance of these items, and that might have to lead to some regulatory treatment in the same way that we now have had fights over net neutrality. We will most likely have in the future regulatory fights over platform neutrality. And it would be really interesting to hear that the same companies that have been fighting for net neutrality will now suddenly fight against platform neutrality. And so what do we conclude? Can we conclude here? Yes, and then there's the last one, which is that this personal AI can also be used by people in an offensive way, offensive in both senses of the word. Aggressive, interfering with others and doing all the nasty things that people on the internet have been doing. They will have another tool at their disposal, but on the other side, and the people who are being attacked in this way will also have that defensive perimeter tool. So this is not the end of the story. It never is, but it is a way forward, to think forward rather than backwards, in the way backwards looking that now legislation, whether it's in Brussels or in Washington, and certainly in China, are proceeding. So to conclude, instead of wringing our hands about AI and running to Washington and to Brussels for ex-ante regulations, we should look hopeful and positive into the future. Artificial intelligence will have liberating as well as troublesome effects, but it will make it less necessary to control content, and it will make it more difficult to control content, and therefore AI will be empowering. Yes. Thank you very much.
Hello. Well, thank you very much for the wonderful talk. I think I can speak for everybody that nobody's tempted when it comes to defenestration. And now we can proceed to the questions.
Safe again. Maybe I was not a...
Okay, the gentleman over there.
Já teda děkuji za slovo. Já budu mluvit česky, tam mám strašlivou angličtinu, omlouvám se.
Já takže musím pamatovat.
Jo, dobře. Já bych se chtěl zeptat, jestli tady řečník si nemyslí, že ta umělá inteligence může být zneužita vládnoucími elitami k tomu, že dojde ne k demokratizaci, ale k centralizaci společnosti, protože umělá inteligence vlastně bude schopna zpracovávat obrovské množství informací, které ty řídící struktury využijí vlastně ve vlastní prospěch. Tak a ještě bych měl jeden dotaz, jestli si nemyslí, že se bude rozvíjet nějaká forma sociálního kreditu, i když v tom nařízení té Evropské unie je proti tomu samozřejmě výhrada. Nicméně tady se hovoří o uhlíkové stopě a že proti ní třeba bojovat, a já se obávám, že právě boj proti uhlíkové stopě, nasazení umělé inteligence je úplně ideální, protože nám to všechno spočítá do posledního CO2.
All right, so I hope I've remembered everything. So the first question is, are you not worried that AI can be misused by the government as it may enable the possibility for greater centralization of power, since it can crunch so much data, is so efficient, the computational power is so it can actually, like the original argument against centralization that it's inefficient may actually be out of the window when it comes to AI. So that was the first question. And the other question was aiming at the possibility of social credit, especially as it relates to carbon footprint and how AI may play a role in that. So that's, yeah.
Okay, well,
hope I got it.
when I hear the word social credit, I get nervous because of the connotations in what's happening in China, where you have a sophisticated system in which not only carbon gets credited, but your behavior in various other ways, and there's implications to you, to your family, to your children's education opportunities, etc. So it is a means of repression. And don't get me wrong, clearly AI it can be used and is likely to be used with repressive purposes, but not necessarily just by authoritarian government, but also by business institutions in their capacity of milking the data and structuring it in such a way that they know more about you than your spouse, and et cetera, et cetera. So this potential I will not negate. What I'm just saying is that there's a counterforce. So in the same way that let's say having a gun in the hand of a police is empowering the government, a gun in the hand, say, of a revolutionary is an empowering method, or can use other technologies, other techniques. And so one should not think of it only as a one-sided armament against citizen, but also a tool for citizen and for consumers and users as a counterforce. And I think could become quite a potentially powerful counterforce when it comes to data, for example. That perimeter would make it possible for you to control what data gets out of that perimeter, and in what ways. How much of it is anonymized, how much of it is even let out, how much of it has to be encrypted. And so you have much more control over your data. And what that means, incidentally, is when you have control over your data and in that perimeter is that you can actually have a commercial transaction for that data, because most people don't have a problem so much about information being provided to somebody else, but rather that it's done without them benefiting directly. So if you want to know what my birthday is, fine, pay me money. Okay, and I'll give it to you. And if that amount is not enough, then give me more, or you will not get. So it becomes possible to have markets in that kind of personal information. And in the end, some people will not give up information for any price because they're kind of like Greta Garbo and they kind of have their privacy. And other people kind of practically will take that information because I'm so lonely. I want everybody to know about me. I mean, that's after all what's happening on Facebook in some instances, which people are kind of want to give you more information about themselves than you ever want to know, right? Okay, so you have a much more fine-tuned ability to control in that fashion. All right, enough said.
Okay, the lady over there. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the talk. I have seen similar platforms and tests of them already, and I want to underline the problems you all mentioned here, and it's mostly the counter restrictions of the other platforms. It seems to be a very hard coordination problem to actually connect to the content providers and other platforms. And also it seems to be a problem for users to actually value this kind of control and having the setup on their side, because it may be hard for them either to understand the value or to set up it. And so my question is if you already found some paths to make the adoption easier, or if you have some thoughts on how can institutions help people to start adoption of such systems. Thank you.
Okay, how does one get this going? I think you will have to start with some people offering it either as a community service to their members, or as an extra benefit to their membership, or as a commercial enterprise for which you subscribe to it and we'll take care of your data protection, will take care of your shopping, intelligent shopping, will just provide a lot of services to you. So there's a benefit to you. And then people will start aggregating, and there will be numbers. It will lead, as you point out, the platforms create problems. I mentioned that. Also, you'd have to probably almost certainly go through a regulatory process of opening that system. But I'm glad to hear that you are familiar with efforts that are taking place, and that strengthens the case, which means that the development community itself sees opportunities here, and eventually that will break through. Now, how long will that take? Not clear. And it also seems to me that excessive regulatory restrictions and liability will, to some extent, if there's no exceptions for smaller type companies, will create problems. In California, this was done, recognized more intelligently, because on the federal level in the United States, nothing has happened on AI. There's just talk like you saw here. But in California, a certain law was either passed or is about to pass on the state level, which kind of creates some responsibility and some liability on AI on platforms, but they have to have a certain size so that the small people can still be unregulated. There's a problem, there's an issue here, and people have been advocating the licensing of AI providers, licensing like a television station, which creates real problems. But one of the problems that it does create is that if you have to follow many mandates, is there's a certain economy of scale in compliance. And so therefore it actually makes it easier to be kind of competing, to conform, to comply with a lot of restrictions on AI if you're a large provider, because you can engineer and organize this and develop it. But if you're a small provider, small AI developer, it becomes an extra cost component that might be overwhelming to you. So some of these laws, while they are, or attempted laws, while they were very well-meaning, are in fact going to support large enterprises rather than small ones.
Okay.
Yes?
Thank you so much for your speech. It was fantastic. I would like to ask you, basically mentioned that all the professions, such as, we didn't specify, but probably such as proofreaders, editors, perhaps even journalists, that in the company settings or in the enterprises, that they would have to kind of requalify themselves and actually work as operational people for the AI settings. So could you elaborate on that? Like, does that mean that all those professions and people have to like requalify themselves?
If you mean qualify as in pass examinations and licenses, that's probably not what you mean. But
Yeah.
if they need additional skills, the answers will be clearly yes. Yes, the AI itself will become more user-friendly, as ChatGPT already is in many ways. It's kind of fairly easy to do, or DALL-E. But become more user-friendly. Then there will be these intermediaries that I talked about, the AI providers, that will also be there in the business of making it more user-friendly for users. But for the various professions, they, on some level, of course, they have challenged, but they have been challenged for decades. I mean, the way the journalists conducted their work was just different than it is now. So what is the threat for them now? Here again, I think it's somewhat exaggerated. Newspapers have already, and therefore journalism and magazines have already been under pressure since television emerged and radio, in fact, emerged. So there's nothing new here. It's just a continuation of technology, electronic technology pressuring print technology. So that will continue. This is just another nail in the coffin, so to speak. Now, people have been worried about it, and there are two strikes in Hollywood right now, one of the writers and one of the actors, and they both fear AI's consequences on them. I think, frankly, there's a bit of an exaggeration here, and some of it is for tactical reasons, because on the matter of AI as a threat, you can unite tactically with almost everybody in society. Everybody's worried about their job, so that's kind of like the tip of the spear here. Is it likely that AI will start writing news stories? Possibly in the future. Given current technology, mostly will be on some kind of commodity information, like quarterly earnings statements by corporations, or some kind of sports teams, kind of scores, what happened to in this particular game, who won, who lost, who scored. Those kind of things could be done very rapidly by that kind of software, yes. And that in some ways replaces some journalists, yes. But the intelligent analysis, I don't see kind of that an AI that essentially regurgitates some stuff that already exists there, and that also incidentally makes kind of sometimes embarrassingly stupid statements. And so that you would still need some quality control of whatever the AI does. You need to have layers of actual humans actually reading this stuff and say whether it makes any sense. Hallucinations is the word. AI hallucinations.
All right, unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions, but thanks again to Professor Eli Noam, and I would encourage you to continue the discussion during the breaks.